Okay, so just a few weeks ago, the idea that we're slowly being chemically poisoned wasn't really talked about all that much, but it exploded all over social media. And RFK Jr. deserves a lot of credit for that. His joining Trump is what really blew it up. Now, is it really happening, or is this just election year shenanigans? Let me show you these stats one more time. 129 Americans, 1/3 of the country, have at least one major chronic disease. 42% have at least two or more, and 12% have at least five. Life expectancy has just decreased to 76.4. And the worst part is, it's getting worse. So now, how does America, or indeed all of humanity, survive if this continues? Someone needs to find an answer for this. Someone might need to answer for this. Someone needs to look at what's being put in our food. And how is it getting in through past our agencies like the FDA? Well, let me show you an ad. Do you remember this ad from the Kool-Aid campaign? We're going to bring back the fun. The fun is illustrated by all those cute little kids with their tongue stained with a dye of Kool-Aid's different flavors. I remember that from when I was a kid. But what makes Kool-Aid yellow? Yellow Kool-Aid, red Kool-Aid, red. What is it? Well, it's food dye. And it's in almost everything we eat, and for good reason, because it's not exactly a healthy additive. Per the FDA, I love this, these additives, color additives, are important components of many products, making them attractive, appealing, and appetizing, and informative. So I think what they're saying here is it's a distraction. Food dye is like the little fishing lure at the end of the hook, that it never works out for the little fishies that bite into it. To give you an example of what we, including our children, are eating, I have a few different flavors of Jell-O. And I chose Jell-O because we should have known Bill Cosby was involved with Jell-O. No, actually because in the 1980s, tobacco companies invested heavily in our food market. You know, the people who said 4 out of 5 doctors recommend you smoke this cigarette. So now they're into the food, and the strategy is really, their strong point is getting people addicted to smoking. And that's what they're trying to do now with food, get us addicted to certain foods. A recent study found that many of these tobacco company-owned food manufacturers focus on, and I quote, the rise of hyper-palatable foods, which contain potent combinations of fat, sodium, sugar, and other additives that drive people to crave and overeat them. That sounds like that's an evil plan. Jell-O is just one of those companies, and they use all additives that contain all those little shiny fishing lure colors that attract kids to eat them. Food dyes. This is strawberry Jell-O, and it looks, and believe me, it does. It tastes delicious. It does. The ingredients are all right on the back, and they seem pretty harmless. Water, sugar, fruit juice blend, concentrate, apple juice concentrate, gelatin. You don't want to know what is made in gelatin. But here at the bottom is red number 40. And I'm going to come back to that here in just a minute. Red number 40. Now there's another package of Jell-O over here. This is lemon lime flavored Jell-O. And this has something called yellow number 5 and blue number 1. Then we have black cherry Jell-O, which is even yummier. It's weird because you're looking at red 40, but also blue number 1. Now, all of these odd additives that are made up with stuff that honestly sound like stuff that can make Zyklon B are food dyes. Now, according to the NIH, the historic original source of these was, and I quote, coal tar and now crude oil, and their use raises serious health concerns. Over the past 100 years, food colors have been found to pose greater threat to health than any other category of food additives. Okay, all right, that didn't make me feel better. I'm slightly alarmed here. Oh, wait, here it is. In general, although many synthetic dyes are regarded as safe, In acute doses, the general view is that high levels of chronic consumption throughout life are not advisable. So I shouldn't eat this a lot, I guess. But I don't know, because that doesn't make me feel better. I mean, how much of that is okay? Then they go on. Unfortunately, as the amount of dye used in commercial products is often proprietary, it's difficult to assess the dietary intake and determine exposure in humans. Okay, wait. All right. So these dyes originate from toxic materials that's not advisable to ingest them at high levels. And with the large amounts used in all of our foods, they can't really determine how screwed we are. Is that the gist of the government's investigation and research? I mean, is this real? Let me go back to the Jell-O. Jell-O, strawberry, red number 40. The NIH stated the use of red 40 coincides with the rise of early onset colon cancer. Have some more, kids. But they also state their research found that red 40 also damages DNA. So nothing to worry about there. More research shows that red 40 is also linked to ADHD symptoms. Now, if you're curious, well, that's just Jell-O. What else has red 40 in it? Well, just these things. Me Lucky Charms. Oh, good. And Catalina Classic and all the juices. And, oh, yeah, cherries, cocktail sauce, gum. Yeah, all of it. Icing. Not Pop-Tarts. I always thought they were healthy because they had fruit in it. Okay, so let's look at lime Jell-O. Okay, yummy stuff. Got a couple of additives, but more specifically, Yellow 5 contains tartrazine. Now, tartrazine is not a big deal. It's just linked to liver disease, problems with the nervous system, DNA disorders, allergies, asthma, anxiety, migraines, and depression. This stuff is insane. Oh, by the way, it's restricted in places like Europe. But why not here? What else is it in? Almost everything. Not Apple Jacks and Velveeta. I always thought Velveeta was so good for you. And cake, Cheetos. I mean, a little mental disorder wouldn't be all that bad, would it? Black cherry Jell-O, blue number 1. Now, studies show 52% of clinical trials found an association with ADHD and this stuff. Not Jell-O per se, just blue number 1. Now, let me ask you something. How many kids that have been spontaneously diagnosed with ADHD have been eating this stuff by the cartload? You know what I mean? And then promptly placed on expensive behavior modification drugs. I mean, who's making money? Wait a minute. That's a chemical in there, and those are pharmaceuticals. Now, obviously not just found in Jell-O. It is also the good captain has been betraying me. The Stay Puft Marshmallow Man and cookies. How is this happening? Why were we not informed? Who's watching over our health? This is just one thing, one additive. There's a whole buttload more. How did it get past the FDA? That's probably going to, well, your mood won't improve. Next. And it's just this is a very sad day for me. I love all this stuff. Why? Fruit Loops. Come on, the little toucan Sam, he can't be bad. He is. Deadly in high doses, like if I eat this whole box, which I might. Anyway, so how does this wind up in our food? How does it get to our... I mean, my mom would never let us have any of this stuff. Any of it. Never. Well, Jell-O. How did this end up on our breakfast table or dinner table? What happened to the government's mandate of keeping you safe? You remember that contract between the government and Moderna for mRNA and that whole vaccine thing? It's weird because you're going to find this eerily similar. So here's how it works out. Let's say I'm a food company. I'm running Beck Foods, and I want to make some little yellow, yummy breakfast loops. And I want it neon yellow because it'll make the kids scream to their parents, I want that, when they pass in the grocery store. And I'm going to need some food dye. Well, that's going to need FDA approval on every single batch. Now, luckily, here at Beck Foods, I'm pretty close to the FDA. We're like this. You see, I pay the FDA's salaries through something called user fees. See, user fee. Here's the FDA. And there's a fence right there. You're not, let me tell you, that science. Of course, I could get over here and I could get right directly to the FDA. But I'm paying them user fees, okay? And I do that so they can regulate the dye that I want in my cereal. Now you'll say, wait a minute. You're paying the manufacturer, the guy, you're paying the watchdogs to watch you? You pay their salaries? Yeah, that's the way it works, you know. Me and the other food manufacturers, we pay about 46% of the FDA budget. I mean, it's mostly big pharma who funds the 6,500 jobs at the FDA, but the rest of it's the food company, so we're good. What could possibly go wrong? What are you, a conspiracy theorist? So anyway, I go to the FDA for approval, and they're like, we don't test any of that. So what are you talking about? You have to prove the food is safe. And you're like, oh my gosh. Wait, I can hire the scientists? I mean, they could have a clown wig on and a big red nose, and I get to produce the science behind this? FDA is like, yeah, because you're trustworthy, aren't you? Well, yeah, here at Beck Food, we're not poisoning the kids with that at all. We're not giving them ADHD or anything like that. I want to provide them with something wholesome that glows in the dark. And so I go to my clown scientist and he says, it's great, you know? And he just, yep, it's great. Yummy yellow number 5. And then I pay a bunch of money to the FDA so they can read that from the clown and then rubber stamp it. Now, it's a beautiful relationship. I mean, it is a little taxing. I have to drive a lot of money to the FDA because, you know, they make the money giving the screaming kids their first box of yellow glowing cereal that makes them go nuts, you know. But I have to drive another truck full of money to the FDA every time I make a new batch. Then they have to say, well, did your clown scientist? Yes, sir. Yes, sir, he did. Boom. Money. Okay, you can make another batch of that cereal. That's how it works. This is how you get to potential chemical poisoning of Americans. Now, I don't know. This doesn't seem like a safety thing. You know what I mean? It really doesn't. I mean, if we look at it from the top of the chalkboard, you can read it for yourself. Quote, manufacturers are required to supply the FDA with evidence that establishes each chemical is safe at the intended level of use before it may be added to foods. Oh. Okay, so the burden of proof to determine whether or not their food is dangerous is actually the guy trying to turn his product into profit, not the government organization whose job it is to keep us safe. And remember, it's just for his food. He could be making all these foods, but if he's only testing it for yellow number 7, no, that's not. But if yellow is in all of these, that might be a bit too much, wouldn't it? Wait a minute, is this going to cause cancer? No. Sure it won't. Trust us. By the way, did we show you our revenue projections for next quarter? And the FDA gets a lot of that too. Come on. Now, I would think the government would have some incentive to make sure we're not getting chemically poisoned. I'm sure it does. But, I mean, money doesn't talk. It screams. Which brings me to the next part on the chalkboard, user fees. Again, read it yourself. Users' fees. Quote, The Food and Drug Administration, FDA, relies on funding from two sources to support its regular activities: user fees and budget appropriations, and user fees paid by the industry. For food dyes specifically, quote, manufacturers pay fees based on the weight of each batch, and these fees support the FDA's color certification program. Doesn't that sound like bull crap? Let's just call this for what it really is, okay? Because if I'm looking at this, let's say I'm a cartel, not like a drug cartel, just a mob-run cartel, okay? If the mob exists, which we all know it doesn't. And I'm like this cartel, and I'm like, I'm going to make food. I'm going to make cocaine for babies food. And I would just mix a little cocaine. Now, I wouldn't mix a lot in there. Just a right amount for cocaine. So if they have this, the babies are safe. Now, not if they're eating it every day, and eating other stuff with cocaine in it. But my food is absolutely safe. So I go to my clown scientist and I'm like, hey, can you write up something that says that cocaine is safe in baby food? And they're like, absolutely. How much money? You give them the money, they come up with a study, and then you give money and the study to the FDA, and the FDA is like, all right, cocaine for babies it is. That's a bribe. That's all this is bribery. The manufacturers who are putting these chemicals into our foods are the ones supplying the totally safe data. Then they pay for fees. And the FDA is like, that's right, I didn't see anything. Cancer, schmancer, I don't know what you're even talking about. That's a lucrative relationship. Strangely, as was the vaccines. In fiscal year 2022, user fees represented $2.9 billion of the FDA's total budget of $6.2 billion. Nearly half of the entire budget from the FDA is coming from big food and big pharma. Now, that sounds a little like a conflict of interest to me, and it doesn't sound like their primary concern is for your health, but more about their bottom line. Curiously enough, there has only been one presidential administration in recent memory who's tried to do anything about any of these additives going into our food supply. I know you know which one, right? Couldn't have been Ray. Donald J. Trump in 2018. The only one. Boy, I wonder why they hate him. I mean, all those companies that just despise him, the people, at the FDA and all of those agencies that just hate Donald Trump. I bet it's because of, wait a minute. Sorry, it's just so addicting. I bet it's because he's racist. You know what I mean? This election has so many implications. I can't remember an election that is more. Hang on. I'm sorry, but it's the flavor. Wait a minute. That was blueberry because it was blue. This one's orange, so it tastes exactly like the blueberry one. This one's purple, and that tastes just like the orange one. I think this might be a scam. I know I've said this every election, and I've always said that I hate it, but it always seems like it is really, really important. This is not the most important election of my lifetime. This is the last election for the republic known as a constitutional America. And it's going to decide how our kids live, how our kids eat, how our kids make money, how our kids spend money. The left always likes to speak in hyperbole about their issues. I showed you the statistics just a minute ago. People are actually getting sick and dying. I don't know, I kind of care about that. Don't you? But it also goes to the soul of the country that I spoke about at the beginning of the show. We don't continue as a country that colludes with entities like Big Food and Big Pharma, who are making themselves rich and putting shiny little fishing lures out that our kids get stuck on. We get sick and die. Thomas Paine said, "We have it within our power to begin the world over again." They were open about the world they were creating. The elites in the world, they're not open about it. They've been lying to you about all of this. A republic, as Franklin said, if you can keep it, a republic is hard to keep. One that prioritizes human life over corruption and cronyism, human rights over corruption and cronyism. That's important.